The evening had settled over the neighborhood like a heavy gray curtain, dimming the colors of the houses and stretching the shadows across the pavement when I heard the laughter. Sharp, careless, wrong. I had just stepped inside after work, still holding my keys, when a woman's strained voice cut through the noise, and something in the tone made my stomach tighten. I moved to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see the street below. There she was, my neighbor, standing near her gate with grocery bags hanging from her hands, surrounded by 5 young men whose confidence grew louder with each passing second. They weren't just talking. They were circling her, blocking her path, leaning in too close, feeding off one another's cruelty. One of them nudged her shoulder as if testing how far he could go. Another kicked one of her grocery bags, and oranges spilled across the pavement, rolling away like frightened witnesses. She tried to keep her voice steady, telling them to move, to let her pass, but they laughed as if her fear were entertainment. Windows up and down the street stayed dark. Curtains remained still. The world had decided not to see. My heart pounded against my ribs so violently I could hear it in my ears. A dozen excuses rushed into my mind. Maybe someone else would step in, maybe it wouldn't escalate, maybe confronting 5 of them alone was reckless. But every rationalization felt like cowardice dressed as caution. Then one of them grabbed her wrist. It wasn't violent yet, but it was possession, and that was enough. Before fear could chain me to the floor, I was already moving, down the stairs, out the front door, onto the street where the air felt colder than it had seconds earlier. "Let her go," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded compared to the storm inside my chest. All 5 turned toward me at once. Their laughter faded into amused smirks as they sized me up, deciding whether I was a threat or just another source of entertainment. "Mind your business," one of them sneered, stepping closer, trying to use proximity as intimidation. My palms were slick with sweat, but I refused to look away. "This is my business," I replied quietly, positioning myself between them and her. I could feel her trembling behind me, could sense how alone she must have felt moments earlier. One of the young men shoved my shoulder lightly, testing me, waiting for me to flinch. I didn't. The silence that followed was thick, electric. For a terrifying second, I thought they might attack. 5 against 1. A statistic waiting to happen. But then something unexpected occurred. A porch light flicked on across the street. Then another. A door creaked open to my left. I heard a voice shout, "We're calling the police." A phone was raised, camera recording. Another neighbor stepped onto his lawn, arms crossed, watching with unmistakable disapproval. The young men glanced around, their confidence faltering as they realized the audience had changed. This was no longer a private performance for a powerless victim. This was a public display with witnesses. Their laughter died completely. One muttered a curse. Another released her wrist as if it burned. They exchanged uncertain looks, bravado dissolving under the weight of watchful eyes. One by one, they stepped back. The street, once silent with indifference, now stood alert and unified. Without another word, the 5 young men turned and walked away, their swagger reduced to hurried strides swallowed by the dark. For several seconds after they disappeared, no one spoke. The street fell into silence, but it was not the earlier silence of fear. It was something deeper, heavier, almost sacred. The kind of silence that follows a close call. I bent down, picked up one of the fallen oranges, and handed it back to her. Her hands trembled as she took it, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. And in that moment I understood that courage is rarely loud or heroic. It is often shaky, uncertain, and terrified, but it moves anyway. And as the porch lights remained glowing and neighbors slowly stepped closer, I realized that what changed the outcome wasn't strength alone. It was the refusal to stay silent. The next morning the street looked almost the same, yet it felt entirely different, as if the pavement itself remembered what had nearly happened. Sunlight spilled gently over the houses, soft and innocent, but beneath that calm glow lingered a shared awareness that something fragile had been tested and, somehow, protected. I stepped outside earlier than usual, half expecting whispers or avoidance, Yet what I found instead were open curtains and lingering glances that held meaning rather than indifference. Mrs. Ramon from the corner house was sweeping her porch more slowly than necessary, watching the road with thoughtful eyes. Two teenage boys who usually rushed past with headphones on stood, talking quietly near the mailbox, their voices low but serious. It was subtle, almost invisible to a stranger, but to those of us who had stood under those streetlights the night before, it was undeniable. The silence had changed shape. By afternoon, someone had left a small bouquet of white flowers on my neighbor's doorstep. No card, no signature, just quiet solidarity. When she stepped out to collect her mail, I noticed the hesitation in her movements was still there, but it no longer carried the same helplessness. There was caution, yes, but also awareness that eyes were watching in a protective way now. Later that evening, as if guided by an unspoken agreement, several neighbors drifted outside around the same time. Folding chairs appeared. A thermos of tea was passed around. No official meeting had been announced, yet we gathered near the place where oranges had rolled across the pavement just hours earlier. Conversations started awkwardly, in fragments. "Are you okay? I should have come out sooner. I thought someone else would handle it." Each sentence carried a quiet confession. We had all heard something. We had all paused. We had all chosen, for a moment, not to move. My neighbor spoke softly when the circle fell quiet, admitting that when they surrounded her, she felt invisible, as though the world had already decided she wasn't worth protecting. Her voice cracked, but she didn't look down this time. She looked at us, and we looked back without turning away. That mutual gaze felt like a promise forming. Mr. Hassan cleared his throat and suggested we exchange phone numbers, just in case. Someone else mentioned installing brighter streetlights. Another proposed creating a neighborhood group chat. Small ideas at first, practical and simple, but each suggestion carried a deeper message. We refused to return to indifference. Phones were pulled out. Numbers were saved. Commitments, however small, were made aloud. As the sky darkened again, porch lights switched on earlier than usual, not out of fear but intention. Over the next few days, the transformation continued quietly. The broken street lamp at the end of the block was reported and repaired. A local patrol car drove by more frequently after several neighbors filed formal complaints. Children who played outside were now casually supervised by more than just their own parents. The street felt awake. One evening about a week later, I watched from my window as my neighbor returned home with groceries again. This time she wasn't alone. Two different neighbors happened to be walking in the same direction, carrying light conversation and one of her heavier bags. There was no dramatic display, no grand speeches, just presence. She laughed at something one of them said, and the sound was steady, genuine. I realized then that what changed that night wasn't only the outcome of a confrontation. It was our understanding of responsibility. We had learned that community is not defined by proximity but by participation. It is easy to live beside one another for years without truly seeing each other. It is easy to assume safety is someone else's job. But the moment we stepped outside, literally and figuratively, we reshaped the story of our street. The silence that followed the confrontation had once felt heavy and uncertain, yet now silence meant something else entirely. It meant peace rather than neglect. It meant awareness rather than avoidance. And every evening when the sun begins to dip and shadows stretch long across the pavement, porch lights flick on not just to illuminate the dark, but to remind us of a simple truth we nearly forgot. When one person finds the courage to step forward, others often discover they had it all along.